An atheist was given a New Testament, and I'm the one who gave it to him. He read the New Testament, and being a scholar himself, he said, there's something about the New Testament that confuses me. He said, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John quote Jesus Christ, and then the epistles and the other letters do not quote their follower. Why is it that the epistles and the other letters of the New Testament do not quote and say, Jesus said this?
Right. Okay, so the question was, why is it that when you read the epistles of the New Testament, for example, the letters of Paul, you don't have Paul quoting Jesus of Nazareth all the time, whereas you do have this in the Gospels? Well, I think the answer to that is that the Gospels are biographies of Jesus, and so naturally they tell the story of Jesus' life and his teaching, so naturally they quote him. By contrast, the epistles are what we call occasional letters. That is to say, they were written on specific occasions to address specific issues that were burning in those churches. For example, the premier example of this would be the letter of Philemon, where Paul is writing to his friend to let Onesimus, this runaway slave, go. And it's a very personal letter. It's clearly just an occasional letter between Paul and this other person about this specific concern. And even in a place like Corinth, Paul addresses issues like meat offered to idols, people were getting drunk at the communion table, how do you use spiritual gifts and corporate worship. Paul is addressing all of these very specific concerns in these letters and not trying to give a sort of biographical account of Jesus. But in fact, if you do read the letters of Paul, you will find he does quote Jesus on several occasions. And even more than that, there are lots of allusions to Jesus' teachings in Paul's letters where he's paraphrasing Jesus. A great example of this is where Paul says, now concerning the married, he says, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my opinion as one who by the Lord's grace is trustworthy. Now he's not saying there, I have not been inspired by the Lord to give this comment. I don't have any sort of inspiration from God, and so I'm just giving my view. He's saying, I don't have any tradition from the historical Jesus to share about this. I don't have something I can quote from Jesus about this, but as an apostle, commissioned by him, I'm going to give you my authoritative view as an apostle of Christ. And that's a perfect example, I think, of where Paul is in touch with the Jesus tradition, but in this case he said, I don't have anything from the Lord about this, and so I'm going to give my view. By contrast, when he addresses in 1 Corinthians 11 the problems at the communion table, there he does say, on the night that he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. And he quotes the Jesus tradition. There he's got Jesus tradition. And what is especially significant about that, you notice Paul, in quoting the words of institution about the body and the blood, is he says, on the night that he was betrayed. This shows that Paul knew the historical context of the traditions that he handed on. He didn't just have the story of the Last Supper. He knew it was on the night of Judas' betrayal of Jesus. So we see there that Paul understood the wider context of the traditions that he handed on and delivered, and knew the wider Jesus story. So only the tip of the iceberg is in view in the epistles, and Paul will quote from or allude to the teachings of Jesus only insofar as they impinge upon the occasions that prompted him to write the letter to these people. But many New Testament scholars have called Paul's epistles a fifth gospel because precisely of his allusions and quotations to Jesus.